By next week, that building will be worth more without you in it.
Claire Voss slid the debt release agreement beneath the passenger side wiper of the red 1967 Mustang, then pressed the paper flat against the glass. 3 cameras watched her hand. Across the hood, Daniel Mercer watched the fuel pressure needle tremble at idle. "If that $900 Mustang makes 100 miles, I'll tear up your garage debt," Claire said. "You have until 6 tonight to prepare it. At 8 tomorrow, you get 100 verified miles, no tow truck, no roadside repair, and no outside parts after the start. If it dies, I take possession of this garage Monday morning. And after the drive, it still has to restart hot." The Mustang had begun as a $900 rolling shell. More than $200,000 had been spent rebuilding it, yet it had never traveled farther than 10 miles without quitting. 3 respected shops had already replaced the carburetor, fuel pump, ignition coil, distributor, and half the wiring. Claire glanced toward the garage Daniel's father had built. "By next week, that building will be worth more without you in it." Daniel said nothing. His 17-year-old son, Owen, stood beside the garage door as the cameras moved closer. At mile 9 the next morning, the Mustang was still moving. At 9.3, Claire leaned toward the live monitor in the showroom. No one around her spoke. The car's last documented failure had come at 9.4. Daniel was no longer watching, only the fuel pressure gauge. He was waiting to learn whether one tiny detail every expert had missed would matter before the next tenth of a mile. Breath. What happened when the odometers rolled forward would either erase $118,000 or cost him the garage his father had built. And before
Claire's
the day was
breathing
over,
is shallow.
Claire would order the cameras
Her
shut
jaw
down.
is slightly
But the road to
tight.
that final tenth of a mile had begun long before the cameras arrived. Mercer Motor Works occupied a narrow brick building outside Columbus, Ohio, where the city gave way to cornfields and warehouse roofs. Daniel's father had bought it in 1978, with a veteran's loan and a toolbox from an Army motor pool. The old man had painted a black line across a wall map every time a rebuilt engine completed its first 100-mile road test. Some lines were straight, some wandered around construction or summer floods. None ended early. Daniel had stopped drawing those lines 5 years before. His wife, Ellen, had died after a long illness, and the medical bills had landed just as 2 commercial customers moved their fleet work elsewhere. Sigh. Daniel borrowed against the building to keep 3 mechanics employed. The note was later purchased by Voss Heritage Automotive, Claire's collector car company, when the local bank sold a bundle of troubled commercial loans. The balance was $118,000. Daniel could manage the monthly payment in a good season. He could not pay the balloon due in 9 days. Claire had not created his debt. She had acquired it because she wanted the block of industrial property behind her new showroom. Her expansion drawings turned Daniel's garage into a paved delivery entrance. She had offered a fair market price for the building, but fair market price did not replace a working shop or preserve the jobs of men who had stayed when Daniel could barely pay himself. That was Claire's accurate criticism of him. Daniel had protected the building so stubbornly that he had avoided making a plan for what came after the balloon payment. He called it loyalty. His accountant called it arithmetic. 2 weeks earlier, Claire's Mustang had coasted into Mercer Motor Works on a covered carrier after dying during a promotional drive. It was the centerpiece of Voss Heritage Automotive's fall collection, a candy apple red fastback with a 390 engine, 4-speed transmission, and invoices thick enough to make the glove box sag. Claire had bought it through Hal Brenner, a broker and restoration consultant who had sourced 6 cars for her company. The Mustang was scheduled to lead a 100-mile charity tour before crossing the block at a national auction. The auction catalog described it as mechanically sorted. Daniel spent 40 minutes listening before touching anything. The engine started clean. The exhaust note stayed even. A hot ignition coil could fail after miles, but the coil had been replaced twice. Vapor lock was possible, yet the failure occurred in cool weather too. Fuel pressure fell slowly rather than suddenly, and the car would recover after sitting with the gas cap loosened. He wrote 3 words on the work order: check tank ventilation. Hal Brenner arrived before Daniel could perform a controlled test. He wore a camel-colored driving coat and spoke as if every minute in a small garage lowered the value of his shoes. He demanded that Daniel replace the mechanical fuel pump with a high-volume unit and return the car by noon. Daniel declined. A stronger pump can hide a restriction for a while. It won't tell us where the restriction is. 3 restoration shops have inspected this car. Then 1 more parts invoice won't help it. Hal called Claire from the parking lot. By lunch, the Mustang had been loaded again. Daniel billed only for inspection time and attached his note. He assumed that ended his involvement. Instead, 12 days later, Claire came back with her lawyer, a proposed debt agreement, and a challenge designed to settle two problems at once. If Daniel failed, she would obtain the property without another month of negotiation. If he succeeded, the Mustang would be proven before the tour, and her collector car company could show the entire drive as evidence. Daniel understood the arrangement. Claire did not believe a blocked vent was worth $118,000. She believed his confidence might make him gamble away his leverage. Owen understood something else. After Claire left the proposed agreement for review, he found Daniel sitting beneath the faded wall map with a yellow grease pencil in his hand. "You could take her buyout," Owen said. "We could rent a smaller place. For 6 months. Then the rent rises, and the lifts belong to a landlord." "I'm not asking because I want to leave. I'm asking because you keep saying this place is for me. What if I don't want you to lose it trying to hand it to me?" Daniel set down the pencil. Owen had spent every summer in the shop, but he was better with cameras and records than carburetors. He could freeze a reflection in a delivery video and match it to a scratch on a fender. Daniel had mistaken interest in the family business for an obligation to inherit it. Breath. "Then it's not for you," he said. "It's for the work. That may be reason enough, but it has to be my reason." Owen picked up the agreement. "If we're doing this, I want every rule written before she starts changing them." That sentence changed Daniel's decision. He had planned to refuse the spectacle and fight the foreclosure delay through his attorney. Instead, father and son spent the evening marking the contract. The route would be surveyed and sealed in advance. The Mustang could carry diagnostic instruments, drinking water, and safety equipment. Daniel could stop only at designated checkpoints or for traffic and safety. He could not add fuel, receive parts, or accept mechanical assistance. A licensed independent monitor would travel in a chase vehicle. The finish required 100 recorded miles, a 15-minute heat soak, and an unassisted restart in front of the showroom. Most important, 2 opposing documents would be deposited with a neutral escrow attorney before the start. Claire's signed debt release, and Daniel's conditional deed in lieu with a Monday possession agreement. If Daniel met the written driving conditions, the deed would be returned to him and the release would be recorded. If he started the official route and failed under the agreement's defined mechanical conditions, the release would be returned to Claire and the property documents would take effect. If the independent monitor rejected the car before the start, or if Claire canceled the challenge, both documents would be returned and the ordinary loan schedule would resume. Claire returned with the camera crew on Thursday morning. She accepted every change except one. Daniel wanted the right to publish diagnostic findings that affected the car's condition or prior invoices. Claire's lawyer demanded confidentiality. "The challenge proves the car," Claire said. "It doesn't authorize you to accuse vendors on camera." "Then don't ask me to sign that the past work was competent," Daniel replied. "I can prove what I measure. I won't certify what I didn't see." Claire studied him for a moment. She had inherited no car company and no family fortune. She had built a regional logistics business, sold it, and entered collector cars because she believed documentation could make an emotional market behave like an accountable one. Her weakness was not ignorance. It was trusting polished documents when a deadline made physical inspection inconvenient. She struck the confidentiality paragraph. "Facts only, no speculation." "Facts only," Daniel agreed. The first test occurred in the garage that afternoon. Daniel connected a calibrated vacuum pressure instrument through an approved temporary fitting and placed its display where both cameras could see it. He did not explain how to reproduce the setup. He explained what it meant. The fuel pump could draw fuel only if air replaced the volume leaving the tank. A functioning vent kept the pressure near atmospheric. A blocked vent turned the tank into a sealed can. With the cap tightened, the reading moved steadily below zero. With the cap removed, it returned to normal. Daniel repeated the test twice. Ruth Bell, the independent monitor, photographed the instrument serial number, recorded ambient temperature, and sealed the cap in a clear evidence bag. Hal Brenner called the test theatrical. "A car at idle isn't a 100-mile road load. That cap is new and correct for the model." "The part number may be correct," Daniel said. "The air still isn't passing." Hal pointed toward the Mustang. "Then replace the cap and be done." Daniel looked at Claire. "Am I permitted to correct the known fault before the challenge?" Claire's answer came after too long a pause. You get standard workshop access until 6 tonight. After that, the vehicle is sealed. It sounded generous, but it created a trap. If Daniel replaced the cap and the car failed for another reason, Hal could say the garage had altered the car. If he did nothing, knowingly driving a fuel-starved engine for 100 miles could create a traffic hazard and damage the pump. Daniel chose a third course. He ordered a period-correct vented cap from a local supplier, documented the package, and asked Ruth to witness an airflow comparison between the new cap and the installed one. The new cap passed the bench test. The installed cap did not. Under magnification, a thin skin of clear coat bridged the internal vent channels. Owen photographed the skin, while Daniel left every part untouched. Then he searched the restoration invoices and found an entry from 14 months earlier. Fuel tank refinished, filler neck restored, new cap fitted. Breath. The next road test sheet was dated 2 days later. It recorded one result. Engine stopped after 9.4 miles. That should have closed the question. Instead, it opened a larger one. The invoices showed 4 later attempts to fix the same symptom. New carburetor, $1,200. New ignition system, $1,800. Replacement engine bay harness, $4,600. High output mechanical pump and labor, $1,900. Each invoice referred to intermittent heat-related fuel loss. None mentioned a tank vent test. Daniel turned to the photograph binder supplied with the car. Before refinishing, the tank wore ordinary surface rust, and the filler cap was dull chrome. After refinishing, the cap shone beneath 3 wet coats of clear. One photograph caught a technician holding the cap on a paint stand. They painted a plated cap, Owen said. They made it match, Daniel answered. Matching isn't breathing. Hal dismissed the photograph. He argued that the painted cap could have been a display piece, and that another cap might have been fitted later. That was a credible objection. The invoice listed a replacement cap, but no serial number could connect the photographed part to the one on the car. Ruth noted the gap in her log. Claire watched her do it. Daniel installed the new, tested cap under continuous video. The vacuum reading stayed normal at idle. Then he checked the fuel system from tank to carburetor. The restoration shop had added a small electric priming pump near the tank to improve hot starts, along with a return-style filter intended to circulate a limited amount of fuel. It was not original equipment, but it had been disclosed in the modification sheet. The return connection, however, fed into a pinched section of hose routed too close to the exhaust. As the car warmed, flow through that line diminished. The blocked cap created the primary vacuum. The restricted return increased fuel temperature and made the pressure fluctuation appear sooner. Replacing either pump could temporarily improve the symptom without fixing the 2 conditions that caused it. Daniel documented the routing but refused to send the Mustang onto public roads until the hose passed a safety inspection. Claire accused him of delaying after signing the challenge. "You gave me workshop access to make the car roadworthy," he said. "You didn't buy the right to make me drive something I believe is unsafe. The hose has passed 3 shops. It has survived 3 shops. That's different." Hal seized on the refusal. He told the cameras Daniel had accepted a high-stakes challenge, discovered his simple theory was incomplete, and now wanted an escape. Claire's communications director stopped the live stream before the argument became the story. The delay cost Daniel. Under the agreement, the challenge had to begin by 8 the next morning. If the car failed inspection before 6 that evening, the debt release offer expired. Daniel could withdraw without losing the garage immediately, but the foreclosure schedule would resume, and the balloon payment would still come due. At 4:20, Ruth called an automotive safety engineer from a testing laboratory used by insurers. The engineer did not repair the car. She reviewed the routing, temperature clearance, and hose specification while Ruth watched. Her written conclusion was narrow. The line needed to be rerouted to meet the manufacturer's installation guidance before a sustained road test. Claire had a choice. She could cancel the challenge and preserve her legal position. She could also authorize Daniel to correct the line, which would strengthen his diagnosis and weaken Hal's claim that the car had already been properly sorted. "Reroute it," she said. "Document every inch." Hal stepped close to her. "You're letting a debtor rebuild evidence against your company. I'm letting a mechanic comply with a safety report," Claire said. "If you have a better document, produce it." Daniel and his senior technician, Luis Ortega, completed the correction before 6. Ruth sealed the hood, filler cap, tool compartment, and spare parts box with numbered tape. The Mustang carried no spare fuel system components. Daniel placed the old painted cap in a padded evidence container. Owen backed up the day's video to 2 read-only drives, gave one to Ruth, and locked the other in the garage safe. At 6:15, Claire offered Daniel a private amendment. She would reduce the challenge to 50 miles and still release the full debt if he agreed not to discuss the prior restoration invoices. The auction could present the shorter drive as a shakedown, and no vendor would be publicly blamed before a formal review. For Daniel, it was the easy road. 50 miles was long enough to prove the immediate repair. The garage would be safe. His employees would be paid. He would not have to expose an industry practice that could turn suppliers and wealthy collectors against a small, independent shop. Owen waited in the office while Daniel read the amendment. On the wall behind him hung the old route map, its black lines fading beneath decades of dust. "What do you think?" Daniel asked. "I think you already promised facts only," Owen said. "The invoices are facts, but it's your building." Daniel folded the amendment once. Sigh. Then he returned it unsigned. A 50-mile drive doesn't satisfy a 100-mile claim, and silence doesn't make a car sorted. Claire did not threaten him. She only placed the amendment in her briefcase. "Then tomorrow is exactly what we signed." Before dawn, Daniel walked the route with Ruth's survey map. The loop ran from the showroom through county highways, a controlled access bypass, and 2 small towns before returning. 5 checkpoints would record 10, 25, 50, 75, and 100 miles. A second vehicle carried Ruth and an emergency medical kit. The camera crew rode separately and had no authority over speed or stops. Claire had selected the route because it resembled the charity tour and included a long grade at highway speed. Daniel had accepted it because the grade would load the fuel system continuously. Neither side could change it after the seal numbers were recorded. At 7:45, a crowd filled the showroom lot. Collectors, employees, local news crews, and 2 representatives from the auction company stood behind barriers. Hal circulated among them with a folder of previous invoices. He had begun telling people the Mustang's failure was caused by Daniel's unauthorized changes. Ruth opened the driver's door and checked the mileage instruments. A mechanical rally odometer had been installed without altering the Mustang's original speedometer. GPS records would provide a second distance source. Fuel level, fuel pressure, coolant temperature, and underhood temperature would be logged. Daniel carried no phone. Owen would remain at the showroom and receive only checkpoint reports. Claire held up the escrow receipt. "The release is funded and signed." Daniel inspected the windshield. A sealed duplicate of the agreement still lay beneath the wiper in a clear sleeve. The executed original was with the escrow attorney. He could see his own shop address through the copy. "Ready?" Ruth asked. Daniel started the Mustang. The 390 settled into a deep, regular idle. Fuel pressure held. At 8 precisely, Ruth cut the starting seal on the route envelope, and Daniel eased onto the road. The first 10 miles felt almost too ordinary. The steering carried the slight looseness common to a restored car that had spent more time on polished floors than asphalt. Daniel resisted the temptation to stare at the gauges. He watched traffic, listened for a change in exhaust note, and checked the fuel pressure display in brief glances. At mile 8, the place where the car usually began to falter, the needle remained stable. At mile 9.4, Ruth's chase vehicle flashed its headlights once. It was the prearranged signal. The Mustang had matched its previous documented failure. Breath. Daniel did not celebrate. He drove another 0.6 of a mile into the first checkpoint, stopped inside the marked lane, and kept the engine running while Ruth recorded every reading. 10 miles. No pressure loss. No vacuum buildup. No assistance. Claire watched the live feed from the showroom. Hal stood beside her and said the previous failure had sometimes occurred at 11. Daniel left the checkpoint. At mile 16, the camera vehicle moved close to the Mustang's rear quarter, trying to capture a dramatic passing shot before the road narrowed. Its driver accelerated, then slowed alongside Daniel. The movement boxed him behind a farm truck climbing a grade. Fuel temperature rose while speed fell. Daniel backed off to preserve distance instead of overtaking. The camera director radioed Ruth and asked Daniel to accelerate for the shot. Ruth refused to relay the request. "The route tests the car," she said over the recorded channel. "The production crew doesn't test the driver." At 25 miles, the Mustang entered the second checkpoint at the Old County Way Station. Fuel pressure had varied by less than 0.2 of a pound. The electric priming circuit remained off after startup, proving the mechanical pump could sustain the engine once the tank breathed normally. Ruth inspected the hood and cap seals. Both were intact. She asked Daniel to state any observed concern. "Heat at the rear line is higher than I want," he said. "Still within the engineer's limit. We continue unless the trend changes." That answer bothered Claire more than confident reassurance would have. Daniel was not performing certainty for the cameras. He was creating a record that could stop the test if safety demanded it, even though stopping would cost him the garage. Hal said the temperature comment proved the repair was experimental. Claire replied that the monitor had allowed the car to continue. Her voice had lost the edge it carried the day before. Between 25 and 50 miles, the route climbed toward the bypass. The Mustang held 60 miles per hour for 12 continuous miles. The cabin warmed. The old 4-speed transmitted a faint vibration through Daniel's right hand. At mile 41, the fuel needle dipped once. Daniel marked the time on the paper log fixed to the console. Fuel pressure did not change. Vacuum remained normal. He reasoned that fuel slosh on the grade, not starvation, had moved the level sender. The distinction mattered. A frightened driver might respond to a gauge twitch by changing speed, introducing heat and load changes that confused the test. At mile 46, it dipped again. Ruth asked by radio whether he was declaring a fault. "No," Daniel answered. "Level indication only. Pressure is steady." The Mustang crossed 50 miles at a rest area closed to the public for the checkpoint. Half the route was complete. Ruth compared the pressure logger against a second independent sensor and found the readings agreed. She drew a line through the mileage box and signed it. At the showroom, Owen used a yellow grease pencil to make a small mark at the center of a copied route map. He did not draw farther. The next segment exposed the car to stop-and-go traffic through a small town. This was where trapped heat could reveal the return line problem. Daniel allowed distance ahead of him, avoided unnecessary throttle, and kept the engine at a steady idle at 2 long lights. Coolant temperature rose, then stabilized. Fuel temperature climbed to the upper edge of the expected range, but stopped there. At mile 63, the Mustang stumbled once as Daniel pulled away from a light. Breath. The camera crew's commentary changed instantly. Hal told Claire the engine was starving again. Ruth asked Daniel for status. "One hesitation under transition," he said. Pressure recovered before the clutch was fully engaged. "Continue?" Daniel checked the lane beside him, listened to the engine, and made the first decision that could not be undone on the route. A safety stop would end the challenge under the agreement, even if the car later restarted. Continuing with a true fuel failure could put him in an intersection. "Continue," he said, but recorded as an event. He did not dismiss the stumble. He claimed it. At 70 miles, the sky remained clear, but the pavement shimmered with August heat. Underhood temperature reached the day's high. The fuel level needle began oscillating across nearly an eighth of a tank. Pressure moved down, recovered, then moved down again. The Mustang had enough momentum to coast safely onto the shoulder, but Daniel remained in the lane. He reduced speed by 5 miles per hour and held the throttle steady. The camera vehicle pulled close again, its lens filling the side mirror. He motioned it back with one flat hand. Ruth ordered the crew to maintain separation. At mile 74, pressure fell to the minimum Daniel had set before departure. One lower movement would require a stop. Breath. The old pattern seemed to be returning, only later than before. Daniel looked at 3 instruments instead of 1. Tank vacuum remained near 0. Fuel temperature was high but stable. The level needle oscillated most when the road curved left. That combination did not indicate a sealed tank or a collapsing pump supply. It indicated the sender float was moving in a tank that was now less than half full. He maintained speed. The 75-mile checkpoint sat at the top of the bypass grade. The Mustang climbed the last half-mile under steady load. Pressure rose as the road leveled. Daniel entered the checkpoint without a stumble and stopped on the painted mark. Ruth checked the seals and downloaded the logger. The low-pressure event lasted 11 seconds and correlated with the steepest lateral curve. A second sensor at the carburetor showed uninterrupted delivery within operating range. "The dashboard needle made it look worse than it was," Ruth said. "That's why we record the system, not the fear," Daniel replied. Hal demanded that the event count as a failure. The agreement defined failure as engine stoppage, required roadside repair, unsafe operation, route deviation, or inability to complete the hot restart. A pressure fluctuation inside the established safe range was not listed. Claire read the clause herself. The test continues. Hal moved away from her and made a phone call. The final 25 miles should have been the easiest. The route descended toward the showroom, traffic thinned, and the Mustang had already traveled more than 7 times its prior maximum. But Daniel knew intermittent faults often created false confidence. He also knew a repaired car could complete a drive while the paper around it remained dishonest. At mile 82, Ruth's chase driver reported a black sport utility vehicle entering the convoy from a side road. It belonged to Hal. He had left the showroom and was now 2 vehicles behind the camera crew. At mile 87, the vehicle moved ahead of Ruth and tried to pull alongside Daniel. Ruth radioed the driver to fall back. Hal replied that he needed to warn Daniel about a possible oil pressure issue reported by the restoration shop. Daniel's oil pressure was normal. Ruth ordered Hal out of the controlled convoy. When he refused, she called the county deputy assigned to traffic support. The deputy intercepted the vehicle at the next ramp and directed it away from the route. The interruption did not alter the Mustang, but it altered Claire's understanding. Hal had claimed Daniel's test was meaningless. Now he was willing to disrupt it with an unverified warning 10 miles before completion. Claire instructed her lawyer to preserve all communications with Hal and freeze any remaining payment owed to his brokerage pending review. At 90 miles, Owen received the checkpoint message and drew a second small line on the copied map. Luis Ortega stood behind him with the shop crew. No one cheered. They had learned from Daniel that a machine was not finished because hope got loud. The Mustang entered the city with 7 miles remaining. Every light seemed to turn red. Coolant temperature rose again. Daniel's shirt stuck between his shoulders. Fuel pressure stayed within range. He counted neither blocks nor minutes. He followed the instruments and the route book. At mile 98, the showroom sign appeared beyond a row of sycamores. The crowd had moved behind barriers along the final lane. Claire stood beside the marked finish box. The sealed duplicate of the debt agreement remained under the windshield wiper, its edges lifting in the airflow. Daniel drove past the entrance. A sound went through the crowd. Hal, watching from outside the barrier after returning by another road, smiled for the first time that morning. The rally odometer showed 99.3 miles. The GPS showed 99.4. The route required a final loop around the adjacent service road. Daniel did not shorten it for the cameras. He followed the sealed map, circled the block at legal speed, and entered the lot from the north gate. The rally odometer turned to 100 as the Mustang's front tires crossed the finish stripe. The independent GPS reached the same figure 3 seconds later. Breath. Ruth signaled Daniel to continue until both systems exceeded 100 miles. He stopped at 100.2. The engine was still running. Ruth recorded the gauges, inspected the seals, and placed a timer on the hood. "Shut it down." Daniel turned the key. The 390 stopped. Metal ticked beneath the hood as heat soaked into the carburetor and lines. The 15-minute wait had been added because the Mustang had also suffered inconsistent hot starts. No one could touch the car. Daniel stepped out and placed the keys on Ruth's clipboard. During the wait, Claire approached him. "You completed the distance. The restart is part of it." "I know." She looked toward Hal, who was speaking rapidly to his attorney near the barrier. "If it restarts, the debt release is automatic. What happens after that is no longer part of our wager." It was never a wager to me. The timer reached 15 minutes. Ruth handed Daniel the key. He sat behind the wheel, pressed the clutch, and turned it once. The starter rolled the engine. It did not catch. The crowd leaned forward. Daniel released the key after the permitted interval. He waited 5 seconds, following the hot start procedure documented before departure. Breath. On the second attempt, the 390 fired and settled into a steady idle. Ruth watched both pressure instruments for 30 seconds. Then she raised the signed route sheet. Clear throat. All conditions satisfied. 100.2 verified miles. No assistance, no added fuel, no roadside repair, and a successful hot restart. Claire's escrow attorney crossed the stripe and handed Daniel the original recorded release. The lien on Mercer Motor Works was discharged, and Daniel's conditional deed and possession agreement were marked void and returned to him. The consequence occurred there, not in a promise for later. Daniel read the legal description and saw his father's parcel number typed beneath Claire's signature. He folded the document and gave it to Owen. Then Daniel opened the hood, not to claim victory, but to complete the record. He placed the old painted cap, the independent airflow report, temperature log, route data, restoration photographs, and invoice sequence across a clean fender cover. He did not accuse Hal of fraud. Breath. He arranged the dates. The cap had been refinished on March 3, the first 9. 4-mile failure was recorded March 5. The first replacement fuel pump was billed March 11. 3 months later, the carburetor was replaced. The following winter, the ignition and harness were replaced. In an internal photograph Owen had found embedded in the invoice archive, the restricted return hose appeared in the same incorrect position before any of those parts were ordered. Claire asked the restoration shop's former service writer, who had come at Hal's request, whether the failures had been disclosed to her company before purchase. The man looked toward Hal. "We disclosed an intermittent concern to the broker. He told us to keep progressing through the approved parts list. Was a tank vent test performed?" "Not that I can find." Hal objected that a service writer could not interpret technical files. Daniel agreed. He produced no conclusion beyond the documents. Ruth confirmed the data chain from the day's test. The safety engineer confirmed only her hose finding. The auction representatives confirmed that a car advertised as sorted could not cross their block while a material diagnostic dispute remained open. That was the institutional consequence Hal had tried to avoid. Claire suspended the Mustang from auction, invoked the vendor audit and indemnity clauses in her brokerage contract, and ordered an independent review of all 6 cars Hal had sourced. Her lawyer served a preservation notice covering invoices, shipping records, photographs, and communications. No one declared anyone guilty on the showroom floor. The contracts began the process that public anger could not lawfully finish. Hal gave Claire one last chance to protect the catalog. He offered to reimburse the final repair if she described the matter as a harmless restoration oversight. Claire had her own easier road. Accepting would preserve the charity tour and avoid admitting that her documentation system had failed. She looked at the Mustang, then at the cameras she had invited to record Daniel's humiliation. Breath. The car traveled 100 miles because the condition was diagnosed, documented, and corrected, she said. It did not arrive here properly sorted. My company stated that it did. We will correct the record before we sell it. She asked the communications director to publish the unedited route certification and a notice that the auction listing was withdrawn pending review. Then she ordered the live cameras shut down. The audit took 6 weeks. It found no evidence that every replaced part had been unnecessary. Several had been worn and reasonably recommended. It did find that the recurring failure had been treated as a sequence of parts opportunities instead of a controlled diagnosis. The restoration shop refunded labor associated with 3 ineffective repair attempts and agreed to submit future disputed vehicles to independent road testing. Hal's brokerage contract was terminated for withholding material service notes and for interfering with the monitored route. Claire did not offer Daniel hush money. She offered a written services contract. Mercer Motor Works would design and conduct independent acceptance drives for selected collector cars before Voss Heritage Automotive described them as sorted. The contract paid standard commercial rates, required dual-signed test records, and prevented the sales department from overruling a safety stop. Daniel read it with his accountant and removed a paragraph that would have made his shop exclusive to Claire's company. He had just saved the garage from one owner. He would not make it dependent on another. Claire accepted the revision. Owen designed the new chain of custody form. It linked each photograph to a timestamp, technician, instrument number, and condition entry. He did not become a mechanic because Daniel expected it. He enrolled in a community college program in digital forensics and worked 2 afternoons a week documenting incoming vehicles. The work was his choice, and because it was his choice, he became good at it. The Mustang returned to Mercer Motor Works after the audit. Daniel corrected 2 minor items, repeated the 100-mile drive without cameras, and signed the car only after the hot restart. Claire entered it in the spring charity tour with a revised history packet that included the fault and repair. The car completed the event. That was the clean public summary. The 6 weeks between the film drive and that ordinary second test were harder than the public understood. The lien was gone, but a released debt did not refill Daniel's bank account. He had postponed 2 customer jobs to prepare the Mustang and paid Luis and the crew for the extra hours. He also lost a fleet contract after the buyer saw the confrontation online and decided Mercer Motor Works attracted too much controversy. Winning the building had protected an asset. It had not guaranteed a business. On the Monday after the challenge, Daniel gathered the crew beside the alignment rack. He gave them the numbers without softening them. Payroll was covered for 3 weeks. Parts accounts were current. Beyond that, the shop needed ordinary work, not attention. Sigh. If anyone wanted to leave before hours were reduced, Daniel would provide a clean reference and pay unused vacation first. Luis looked at the other 2 mechanics. You planning to reduce your own hours? My pay goes first. That's not what I asked. Daniel understood. For years, he had responded to every shortage by staying later, sleeping less, and treating his body as the one tool the business could consume without an invoice. Owen had seen it. The crew had seen it. Ellen had spent her final year asking him to come home before the porch light burned out. No more all-nighters, Daniel said. If the work doesn't fit the day, we schedule another day. Luis nodded once. Then we're here. The others stayed too, but their choice made Daniel more accountable, not less. He started charging for diagnostic time instead of waiving it when a customer approved a repair. Each work order separated observation, test, conclusion, and authorization. Customers who only wanted a part installed could still request it, but the invoice would no longer imply that Mercer Motor Works had diagnosed the part as defective. That change came from the Mustang as much as the 100-mile route did. Daniel realized Hal's system had not begun with a villainous order to cheat someone. It had begun with small conveniences. A customer wanted speed, a shop wanted approval, a broker wanted a clean catalog line. Each person documented the part they touched and left the unresolved symptom for the next invoice. By the time the bills reached $200,000, the paperwork looked substantial enough to substitute for knowledge. Claire faced the same problem inside her company. The board of Voss Heritage Automotive convened a special vendor review 3 days after the drive. 2 directors wanted to release a short statement blaming the restoration shop and close the matter. A third argued that Claire had endangered the company's reputation by turning a technical disagreement into live entertainment. Claire did not ask Daniel to defend her. She requested his instrument logs and offered to pay for his time if he attended. Daniel sent the logs but declined the meeting. Your board needs to decide whether your own process failed, he wrote. My presence gives them someone else to question. The board found that Hal's report claimed a road test had been limited by weather, though photographs showed dry pavement. A later email mentioned the 4-mile shutdown. Hal forwarded invoice pages to Claire's acquisition manager but omitted that message, and the manager never requested the full service thread before the catalog deadline. The omission did not prove a crime. It proved Claire's company had advertised a condition it never independently verified. The board froze 2 acquisitions and required measurable corrective action before the next catalog. Hal answered the audit with a demand letter. He claimed the film test damaged his professional reputation, that the painted cap could have become blocked after his last inspection, and that Claire had breached their agreement by withholding commissions. His attorney requested the original cap, all video, and Daniel's shop records. Daniel's own lawyer advised him not to surrender anything without a subpoena. Daniel agreed about the original evidence but offered duplicate records through Claire's audit process, provided every party signed a receipt. He wanted no private pile of documents that only his side could interpret. Owen created a manifest for the duplicate drive. It listed each file's digital fingerprint, creation time, camera source, and transfer history. When Hal's consultant suggested that a teenager could have changed the footage before copying it, Owen did not argue. He asked Ruth for the read-only drive she had received before the test. Breath. Its files matched his copies exactly. You knew they'd say that, Daniel told him afterward. I knew I would say it if the evidence belonged to the other side. That answer made Daniel smile. Owen was learning not merely to protect their version, but to build a record that survived reasonable doubt. It was a different craft from his grandfather's, and no less exact. The original cap went to a materials laboratory, selected jointly by the insurer, Claire's company, and Hal's attorney. Microscopy showed that the clear coating bridged internal vent paths and had accumulated road dust over more than a year. Chemical comparison found the coating consistent with the clear coat batch listed on the restoration invoice. The lab would not say who applied it or who knew the effect. It did establish that the obstruction predated Daniel's possession by far, more than a few days. The return line finding was more complicated. Installation photographs showed the hose in the restricted route while the car remained at the restoration shop, but the modification had been approved by Hal as a hot start improvement. The shop's technician said he had recommended a different route and was told the delivery date could not move. Hal denied receiving that recommendation. No signed change order settled the dispute. Claire could have treated the uncertainty as a reason to abandon the whole review. Instead, she separated what could be proved from what could not. The vendor refund covered documented ineffective work, not every part Daniel suspected. Her public correction stated that the tank ventilation and return line conditions were present before her company accepted the car. It also stated that responsibility for particular decisions remained subject to private dispute. The statement was less dramatic than the confrontation and more costly. Buyers paused on 2 vehicles. One consignor moved a collection to another auction house. Claire reported the losses to her board, rather than hiding them inside marketing expenses. Daniel noticed that. When she brought the services contract to his garage, he asked why she had not used the refund to quietly finish the Mustang and relist it under a new catalog number. "Because I put a document under your windshield and told the public it meant something," she said. "If my own condition reports mean less than that document, I don't have a business I understand." It was not an apology, so Daniel waited. Claire opened a second folder. Sigh. Inside was a written acknowledgement that the foreclosure challenge had been designed partly to gain leverage over his property. She had followed the law and funded the release, but she now recognized that linking a man's workplace to a filmed mechanical test had created pressure unrelated to the quality of the diagnosis. "I won't use a property claim as a promotional wager again," she said. "And I was wrong to assume your debt made your judgment cheaper." Daniel read the page and placed it beside the contract. "I was wrong to sign because I thought saving this building justified any risk. If the safety engineer had cleared nothing, I might still have tried to find a way to start. But you didn't." This time, they did not forgive each other through a speech. They altered the agreement. Every future acceptance test could be stopped by the driver, monitor, or safety observer without financial penalty. A failed test generated a condition report, not a public accusation. Marketing staff could record only after the technical plan was locked, and camera requests could not reach the driver during motion. Claire's company would pay for diagnosis whether the car passed or failed. The first vehicle under the new process was an ordinary 1964 sedan with a steering pull. Daniel traced it to one mismatched tire. The consignor approved a correct set, and the sedan completed its route. Claire watched without cameras and waited for the instrument record instead of asking for reassurance. That modest test convinced the board. Voss Heritage Automotive adopted the protocol for every car advertised as road-ready above a set value. Everything else had to be labeled as is. Hal's dispute moved to private arbitration under his contract. Daniel appeared once as a fact witness. He carried no grease-stained prop and delivered no speech about honest men. He explained the vacuum readings, the cap test, the documented route, and the limits of his conclusion. When Hal's attorney asked whether Daniel benefited financially from finding the fault, Daniel answered yes. His debt was released after the successful challenge, and he later received paid testing work. "So you had a reason to produce the result Claire Voss wanted," the attorney said. "She expected the car to fail," Daniel replied. "The instrument didn't know what either of us wanted." The arbitrator reviewed the record, then issued a narrow ruling. Breath. Hal had breached his disclosure duty by withholding the service email. He had also violated the monitored route agreement by entering the convoy. The decision did not label every repair fraudulent. It upheld Claire's termination of the brokerage contract, allowed her to retain disputed commissions against documented losses, and awarded part of the audit cost. Hal kept the right to dispute the restoration shop's separate claims. The narrowness of the ruling satisfied Daniel. A just process did not need to turn every mistaken man into a criminal. It needed to name the duty, prove the breach, and attach a consequence that the contract authorized. As business returned, Daniel used the first payment from the testing contract to restore the employee's tool allowance he had cut during Ellen's illness. With the second, he replaced the garage's failing roof drain. He did not buy a commemorative lift or repaint the old sign. The building needed to work before it needed to look victorious. On the first quiet Friday after the contract began, Daniel climbed a ladder beneath the old wall map. Owen stood below holding the yellow grease pencil. The paper showed hundreds of black routes drawn by Daniel's father and only empty roads from the years after Ellen died. Daniel did not trace the televised route himself. He handed the pencil down. "You kept the independent record," he said. "You mark the verified miles." Owen drew a thin yellow line from the garage to the bypass, through the 2 small towns, and back to the showroom. At the point marked 100, He wrote the date in numbers small enough to match his grandfather's careful hand. Then he continued the line 6 blocks farther, returning it to Mercer Motor Works. The debt release rested in the safe. The new testing contract lay on Daniel's desk. Outside, the Mustang cooled after another ordinary drive, its fuel tank drawing air through a cap nobody would ever admire. Sigh. Daniel switched off the shop lights one bank at a time. The yellow route remained visible in the last amber glow, not as a path Owen had been required to inherit, but as the first one father and son had chosen to record together.